Hello all. I was going to try and do one of those videos of me drawing, but I moved the paper around so much that it just became incredibly dizzy to try and do and watch. So what I decided to do instead was do a quick video kind of going through the process of how I draw a caricature. The particular caricature I'm doing is of Ricky Gervais. I just finished watching Afterlife season 3 and it just kind of came in my head to do it, and I thought, fuck it, why not? Or it's occasionally how these things work. First thing you have to do is find a decent picture, and this is something I always impress on people when I'm doing commissions, is that, you know, I need a good, smiley, clear picture of the person. At the end of the day, the picture will be as good as the reference I've got, and you'd be surprised at some of the photos I get and people ask me to draw something from it. So I found a picture of Ricky which kind of suited the idea I had in mind, and what I do is print it out and then I'll do a couple of grid lines on it. So I'll do one across the eyes, from corner to corner of the eyes, and then I'll do one down the center of the face, really from the brow down to the chin. Whichever angle the face is at, that's where the line will go. I tend to use a mount board to draw on, a kind of card. I just find it works best for me. And I'll transfer the marks and the grid line across. And I always start on the eyes. I don't think I've ever drawn a picture of a face that I haven't started on the eyes. So it's just kind of a standard thing I do. Whilst the likeness can be changed by any point, I always find that get the eyes right and you're halfway there. So I do the eyes and I kind of expand the features out from there, generally working downwards. When I get towards the mouth, I will do another line on the photograph from the corners of the mouth across, because mouths aren't parallel to eyes, and sometimes it can look like they are but they're not. So I'll transfer that one across, and then I'll try and judge the distance between the mouth and the nose, and this sometimes takes me a few goes. It's always difficult to judge when I'm doing a caricature, because you want to exaggerate the features slightly, but you also need to keep a likeness, and it's kind of a balancing act. Once I've done that, I will finish sketching the face, and again, the shape of the face can change everything and the hairline can change everything. It's amazing how many little details there are that can change a face with a pen stroke. It's really odd. It always never fails to surprise me how I'll think it doesn't look anything like it, and then I'll maybe change the slight curve on the nose, or I'll change the lips slightly, and suddenly it's like, oh, there it is. Once I've done that preliminary sketch, I will go to a computer and I will use the photograph on the computer to draw from again, and kind of to hone the image. I just find the computer a much clearer, sharper image to draw from than the photograph that I've printed out. So once I'm happy with that, the next stage is to do the kind of solid black lines, and I tend to use a Staedtler pigment liner, and 0.3 is the main go-to, though for any kind of smaller, finer details like creases under the eyes or the top lip or the bottom lip, I'll tend to use a 0.1 or a 0.05. I'll kind of pick out the strongest bits that I want to pick out, and it's not a lot of lines. I'll draw the outline and I'll draw kind of vaguely the features. The eyes I'll probably do in more detail, but some of the other features I'll kind of vaguely pick out. Then the bit that always terrifies me, rubbing out the pencil marks, because at that moment I have to trust that I've got enough information down so that when I do the caricature, it will still look like the person. Because again, it's a moment where the pencil lines have defined the caricature and suddenly they're gone and I'm just left with pen marks. Sometimes it still looks a lot like the person, sometimes the likeness is a little bit vaguer. Once I've done that, the next thing I will do is I will start colouring in. And I know I sound like a 5-year-old, but I don't know any technical or arty-farty terms for that, so I'm going to go with colouring in. And I use Winsor & Newton Pro markers and start off with a blush, particularly with Ricky's face, and with the majority of faces I'll use a blush because it's quite a nice tone. But occasionally I'll start with an ivory or a almond, or even sometimes a primrose, depending on the skin tone and the skin colour. It can depend how I want to build it. You know, some people have got very pale skin. I'll start with an ivory. Some people who have got darker skin, I might start with a primrose to kind of as simply a base coat to lift the colours I put on top. I'll do a coat on the face, for want of a better phrase, of blush, leaving the areas of the highlights as just pure white for the back of the card. Then I will do a second colouring in using blush and kind of building up the shadows. So I'll generally leave areas that I think are lighter with the first coat of blush. I mean, there are times when I'll almost cover the entire picture again with the blush pen because there are so many darker areas on the skin and very few light areas. Next will be the satin pen. Tonally it's very close to blush, so it has a nice kind of gradiated colour, and it means that I can build on the shadows again more. So I'm working from light to dark and kind of can create the shape of the face. And I do a couple of coats of that, and then next I'll use a dusky pink. Now sometimes the dusky pink I'll use twice again. I mean, most times I do, but on this particular one I only did one application of it. I just felt it went dark enough quickly enough, and I didn't really need to go any further because it felt like quite a dark image already. And I also went back in with the satin to try and fade it in a bit more, to graduate it in a bit more. It's one of the good things about these pens is you can layer them on top of each other, and each time it goes slightly darker than the previous time. It's one of the reasons why when I'm using them, particularly for the first coat of blush, it's very important to just keep going and not have any breaks, because the moment you have a break and you go back to it, you'll end up with a line, and it's almost impossible not to have a line, and it's almost impossible to get rid of it once it's there. So after that, I usually do the lips, and I completely forgot to do the lips on this one, so let's skip that. Then I will go in sometimes with a sandstone pen for bits, but in this case I used a warm grey 1 and a warm grey 2, and they're kind of slightly brown, so it picked up the areas that I wanted to darken and have more definition to. I always have to find I've got to be careful with those pens, because even though they're browny, they can turn the skin tone a bit too grey. So it's kind of one that's to be used judiciously rather than kind of slapped all over the drawing, and just really for the really darker areas. After that I did the hair and the beard, because Ricky's got a beard in this. Beards can be great, beards can be difficult. In this case it's kind of a grey browny coloured beard, which means trying to gradiate the tones is a bit more difficult. And what I'll do a bit later on is I'll use a white pen to help me with that. Again, I started with a sandstone to do a base colour, then I built on top of that with a caramel, then I built on top of that again with a warm grey number 4 to kind of slowly darken it up, and after that I did a cool grey 5. It's not quite black, but it's quite dark, so it can kind of pick out the darker tones. And looking at the picture, it feels at times like it might be too dark, because bearing in mind I'm drawing it against a completely white background and a very white background. But as you start adding the darker tones, it kind of lightens the face, and as I start drawing around it again, it lightens the face. So occasionally I have a moment of looking at it thinking, have I gone too dark? And then you can bet as soon as I start adding kind of the darker shades and the blacks, which will come at the end of the drawing, that will kind of go backwards a bit more.